I thought this place was empty.
Please, son, don't be alarmed. We aren't here to cause trouble. We didn't have anywhere else to go after the fires took the park. Please don't call the city.
I'm just here to do the lawn. The bank sent me.
I didn't stop my mower because the weeds were thick or the porch was sagging. I stopped when I noticed the flicker of blue fabric behind the shutter that should have been shut tight. I realized then that the path through the side yard wasn't overgrown by chance. It was being walked carefully every single night by someone trying to leave no sign of their presence. This house didn't belong to anyone now, at least not in the eyes of the law. The paint was bubbling, the gutters were filled with leaves, and the garden had turned into a jungle of ivy and thorns. As I stepped off my mower and walked toward the side door, it pushed open just a crack. 2 women stepped into the light, squinting as her eyes adjusted. They stood shoulder to shoulder, one slightly taller than the other. They were both in their late 70s, their faces marked by deep exhaustion that sleep couldn't remedy. They wore sundresses that had faded to a soft gray, mended with mismatched thread. The taller woman held the other's hand tightly, her knuckles turning white, as if she were the only thing keeping them both grounded. They didn't yell or beg. They simply looked at me with a hollow fear. The expression of people who had spent their whole lives being good citizens, only to be cast aside as life became too expensive. They told me they used to live in the apartment complex 3 blocks away. When the new owners bought the building and tripled the rent, their social security checks became useless. They had no kicks to call, and the wait list for state housing was 3 years long. This house had belonged to an old friend from church. After she passed and the lawyers began fighting over the estate, the house sat silent. They moved in during a Tuesday night rainstorm. They lived like mice, never turning on a light. They cooked on a small camping stove and bathed with jugs of water they filled at the park. They let the grass grow tall on purpose. They knew that as long as the yard looked like a mess, people would keep their distance. They understood that a neat house is one that draws attention. The woman in the blue dress admitted she had tried to pull the tallest weeds with a kitchen knife, but her back had given out before she could finish a single row. She whispered, her voice trembling, "Please don't report us. We aren't thieves. We're just 2 old women tired of being told there's no space left in the world for us." As they stood in the shadows of the peeling doorway, I realized they weren't just hiding in a house. They were protecting the last bits of dignity they had. This situation wasn't about a bank-owned property or city rules anymore. It was about 2 people who had paid their taxes and worked for 50 years, only to end up hiding in the weeds. I stood there longer than I planned, the mower's engine ticking softly as it cooled. The air smelled of cut fuel and hot metal, but beneath it was something else. Dust, old wood, and the faint sweetness of overgrown jasmine climbing the porch rail. The taller woman spoke again, her voice steadier, as if she'd already accepted whatever answer I might give. "We won't argue," she said. "If you need us gone, we'll go. We always do." That sentence hit me harder than any plea could have. We always do. Not we'll leave, not we'll pack. Just the quiet certainty of people who have learned that permanence is no longer meant for them. I looked back at the lawn. Waist-high grass, thistles, and burrs stuck to my boots. It was exactly the kind of mess the bank hated, the kind of mess I usually erase without thinking. For the first time, I understood that the chaos wasn't neglect. It was camouflage. "I'm not calling anyone," I said, surprising myself with how firm I sounded. "I'm just here to cut grass." The shorter woman, Sarah, let out a breath she had been holding for so long it shook her shoulders. She pressed her forehead briefly against the taller woman's arm, eyes closed, like a child who had almost wandered into traffic. "But I do have to make it look intentional," I added. "If the yard suddenly looks perfect, people will ask questions." They nodded immediately. They understood how systems work. They had been crushed by them. So I started with a compromise. I cleared a wide, clean path from the curb to the porch, enough to show that someone maintains this place. But I left the edges wild. I trimmed back the thorns that grabbed at ankles, but I kept the tall grass near the windows. From the street, it still looked abandoned. From the inside, it looked livable. As I worked, they sat on the porch steps, far enough back to stay in the shade. They didn't talk much, but every so often, one of them pointed something out. An old rose bush that used to bloom white. A patch of mint that refused to die no matter how dry the summers got. Little proof that this house once knew love. When I finished, I shut off the mower and wiped my hands on my jeans. The taller woman reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a folded bill. It couldn't have been more than a few dollars. "Please," she said, holding it out. "We don't want charity." I gently pushed it back. "Then don't call it that. Call it a neighbor helping neighbors." She hesitated, then nodded once sharply, as if agreeing with herself more than with me. Before I left, I told them when I'd be back. 2 weeks. Same time, same plan. Keep the balance, keep the disguise. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The house still looked forgotten. But I knew better now. Behind those shuttered windows were two people who had learned to disappear, not because they wanted to, but because the world had stopped making space for them. And I realized something else too. The lawn wasn't what needed saving. It was the idea that some lives are worth hiding.